Welcome to Rehash, a Web3 podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rehash. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and in this episode we'll be talking all about automating on-chain crypto payments, subscription business models in Web3, and a lot more with Eleni Steinman, co-founder of Loop Crypto, a brand new Autopay for Web3 basically is what it is, and I'm super excited to talk to her more about what she's been working on. So welcome Eleni, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk.
Yeah. So before we dive into all things Loop and what you've been working on, can you tell listeners a little bit about your background, fill them in where you came from and sort of like how you initially fell down the crypto rabbit hole?
Yeah, so I probably have a pretty unpredictable path, which is I originally worked at the federal government. So I used to work in trade finance as a bureaucrat, and I actually really loved working at the government, but I wanted to do my hand at the private sector. I've always wanted to run my own business, and so I went to business school to do just that. And in business school in like 2016, 2017, I found the Bitcoin white paper and my mind was blown. I was so obsessed with reading about it. I read Princeton had some what's it called? Academic book about how cryptography works that I read that and I knew I wanted to work in this industry and ended up taking a job in Chicago just to get into crypto.
Wow. Yeah. So that is quite a non-traditional path. And I feel like we should flash on the screen that you are not a Fed or something like that
No.
because people freak out when they hear that.
No.
Okay. So Loop Crypto, Autopay for Web3. How did you get the idea for this?
Yeah, so my co-founder and I used to work together at our last job, and we actually quit without an idea. And so we started from this place of, well, we're probably best positioned to solve problems we've had. And when we were ideating on what were pain points we experienced, it became clear that paying subscriptions, so SaaS payments, was a huge headache, especially for the individual. It's annoying to go and click a button and pay your service provider every month. But you could imagine if you're a DAO and you have like a multi-sig and you need to get 3 or 4 people every single month to pay, in this case, a subscription, but really it's anything that's recurring. It's a miserable experience. And it was really this aha moment of like, there's no autopay and the world runs on autopay. And so then we thought about how we could solve it.
Yeah, that's recurring payments is definitely a big problem that I think it took Web2 a little while to figure out as well. But we're definitely not there with Web3. At least I haven't seen anything until Loop came around for that. This is it, recurring payments and subscription businesses. Like this is not a strange concept to us, to anybody who's new to the Web3 world, something that everybody's familiar with. But in Web3, are there other problems that we face or other things we need to consider when it comes to recurring payments and subscriptions?
Yeah, I think the opportunity is so much bigger than just autopay because of the interoperability and composability of Web3. So, for example, something that you could use a recurring payment for is, let's say, the dollar cost average into an asset, right? Right now, if you want to swap for tokens on Uniswap, you have to go every single month or week, click a button, trade your USDC for ETH. With autopay, you could set up that automatic purchase, so dollar cost average. But you could also set up sort of the next step, which could be staking that, right, and earning some yield, or moving it into a different, DeFi opportunity. And that kind of like programmable functionality doesn't exist in Web2 because systems don't talk to each other. And to us, like what we're most excited about, this is the base layer. This is just infrastructure. It's all the other things that you can build on top of an automatic payment.
Got it. So Coinbase has a recurring buy feature. Is what Loop is building similar to that?
Yeah, so their recurring buy is off chain. So you are buying within their centralized exchange. And there's plenty of tokens and people in crypto that don't want to move money into a centralized exchange. And because of the fact that it's off chain, you can't do this interoperability stuff, right? You just buy it every month and it sits in your Coinbase account. In our case, you can plug it into other DeFi parts of the ecosystem and really do much more like complex financial trades.
Yeah, so I want to break it down a little bit more and get into some examples. You've already mentioned a few DAOs with their multi-sigs, and other types of businesses, but can you give some specific examples? Maybe we'll start with like SaaS businesses as,
Yeah.
more of like a Web2 place to start. How can SaaS businesses use Loop, for instance, for autopay?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the most obvious is collecting subscriptions in crypto. But on top of that, you could do something like accounts receivable financing. So in the Web2 world, right, you're making money every single month. You have these invoices that show that you have payers, and you go out to a third party and you can get, funds earlier, essentially. You can package those revenues and sort of sell them early. In the Web3 world, you could totally automate that, and all that information is on chain, right? So someone can quickly verify that you've had so many customers that paid every single month, what the cancellation rate is, and then offer you credit, right? Sort of the flip side is true for users. So a company can clearly see if someone is a good payer to one company, and then perhaps offer you a discount or want to attract you to use their end product. And so this visibility into people's actions on chain and across their entire buying behavior, I think is a new concept that will open up the doors to other inventions.
Yeah, and I think like you said, once crypto credit cards becomes a thing, which maybe they're out there, but I don't know of any personally, do you?
I know of a company in stealth that is trying to do
Okay,
credit cards for DAOs.
I know of one in stealth as well. But like you were saying, I think once crypto credit cards becomes a thing, then this use case will be even more powerful for businesses to see like who do I feel safe giving credit to. Everything is recorded on chain. I can feel good about giving credit to this person because they have such a good track record of paying.
Yeah, and you can even have like a form of collateral, right? You could take all of the expected on chain payments, you could issue some token against them. And as someone repays their subscription, instead of that money going to the end company, it goes to the person who offered credit, right? As a way of like automatic repayments. I mean, these are things that are probably a lot more complicated to build and will take time, but weren't available in the Web2 world.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me of like the splits function on Mirror. When you write an article or when you publish something on Mirror, you can have a built in split with some of the proceeds going to different people who contributed to the project. So, yeah, that would be really powerful and really like expedite payments and just make the whole process a lot simpler than it is now.
Yeah, I mean, anything programmable should be able to be done.
That's true. So another thing you mentioned is DAOs, which I'm, very. I spent a lot of time in DAOs, and so this is something I'm very interested in hearing more about. Is how Loop can help DAOs. Like, what are some, I guess, like real life examples you can think of that DAOs might have to deal with a subscription or a recurring payment that they could use Loop for?
Yeah, so I think it's from both directions. It's DAOs as a business and then DAOs as a payer. So from the business perspective, crypto introduced the concept of ownership economy, and the benefit of being an owner is access to cash flows. So just because you have an asset and that asset's value goes up, you don't want to have to sell it to be able to, see the revenue from that ownership. And DAOs in particular can't use dollars, right? They're not going to have a subscription service that takes credit cards because they live on chain. So I even think automatic recurring payments opens the doors for DAOs to have some sort of SaaS based model that allows them to collect crypto payments and create that cash flow to their owners. This is not in the lieu of being an owner. You could have to stake, a token to be able to access some end service, but it's in addition, right? The flip side of that is DAOs as payers. So again, if you're a DAO and you're trying to access, let's say, an end service, you want to use Alchemy to run nodes, right? Every single month, you're clicking this button to pay Alchemy. That's a headache. You could set up some sort of automatic recurring payment with pre-authorizations, have a vote for your community, have that vote take place once instead of every single month, and set up sort of processes that are approved by your owners. This is something actually that Tally is looking into with their recipes that we're looking to partner with to make those business operational processes smoother. Sort of a third like sub bucket of those business operations is diversifying your treasury, right? You could have DAOs that, let's say, want to sell a little bit over time, right? As owners, you want that to be predictable. I mean, there's an example of this in the Web2 world where owners or high management of companies need to tell the world before they sell their stock so that it's not related to non-public information. It's just happens over time. DAOs need that functionality as well because they have things they need to pay for. And you don't want DAOs to sell because they have non-public information about price, right? So you could set it up, you could sell a little bit over time, regardless of what's happening. It's out of the control of the owners. And now everyone else has comfort that, the treasury management is happening in an ethical way.
I think that could really help with DAO operations or governance too. A big problem that DAOs face today is just getting people to stay active and contribute and like vote on things. I think is a huge problem. So I think if somebody could vote on a proposal once and have that action be executed regularly over time, I think that would also reduce the barrier and the friction a lot for people to actively contribute to the DAOs that they're part of.
Yeah, and what I've heard sort of anecdotally about non-participation is, the biggest fear is you vote for something that's malicious, that you don't trust the code. And so we've developed our smart contracts to be templates so that they're not very different. They're all certain fields are customizable, but you can trust a Loop smart contract is going to do what its authors say it's going to do because of this template. And honestly, because of reputational risk, right? It's not someone random who's submitted code and says, vote that we recurrently pay this output. And I think that'll be really central to increasing participation and like action within DAOs.
How easy is it to actually set up? Like if I'm part of a DAO and I want to set up a recurring payment through the DAO, like what are the steps to get that done? Is it pretty basic? Like, can I do it as a non-technical person?
Yes. Well, one day we're not there yet, but in our roadmap it's a drop down. And so the fields that you have to configure are what tokens you want to accept, which network you want to be on. So right now we're on Polygon and Ethereum, but we plan to be on every L1. You wanted your subscription amounts and then the frequency, and that's it. Everything else is already written in the contract, and it should be good to go.
Wow, I love that. Okay, so tell me about some other kinds of businesses that could use Loop. I mean, I think the DAO use case is really big for me, but what are some other use cases?
Yeah, so I mean, one I kind of care about is donations. It's one-off donations aren't as they're good for the end user, not as good for the nonprofit because having something that's a recurring flow of cash is just more predictable for them. And you could easily do crypto donations, right? That is a recurring payment. Another big one is loans, right? So right now, most things in crypto are bullet loans; they're just single payments at the end. But we're starting to see companies provide fiat to mostly in developing countries, but using crypto as the lenders. And if the person in the real world who's collecting cash and needing to pay off this loan, I mean, the last thing they want to do is like go from their bank account to their exchange, from the exchange to their MetaMask, from the MetaMask to their repayment. I mean, that whole flow needs to be automated. And I think we're a really important step in that automation.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think the Giving Block is maybe the only like donation platform I know of that accepts crypto right now. But I think as more and more nonprofits accept crypto, I think this will be a huge use case.
Yeah, me too.
So in the future, like tell me more about like what's on the roadmap for Loop. So you guys are still private right now. I think public launch is coming in the next few months, I think.
Yeah, no, that's right. So right now we're testing with a few alpha customers, making sure that everything works as we would like. And then we'll launch with what we call these templates. And so, there'll be a template to use if you want to collect SaaS subscriptions, a template if you want to do a recurring buy. And then I think what distinguishes us from maybe other companies in the payment space is we have tooling. So if you're a SaaS company and you want someone to pay you recurringly, like you need a checkout flow. You need a way for them to click what subscription they want to buy, pick what ERC20 token, sign a transaction, all without having to know how to code, right? And on the flip end for the company, what you need is APIs so that you can see if someone signed up to a contract on chain and then give them access to your end product, which might be off chain, right? You need a CRM to see how many people have paid, what currency they're paying in, like where are people converting from. And then we have a customer portal. So it's really important to us that people are able to manage all their subscriptions. And we make that super easy with cancel buttons, with upgrade buttons. I think we're going to talk about security in a little bit, but we also want to make it really simple to control the allowance that you allow this contract to interact with your wallet, because that's an important security parameter that I think a lot of projects don't put as central as they need to for non-technical people like me.
Yes, I definitely want to get into security. And I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask you about the customer management tools. Like, I know for me personally, I subscribe to things all the time just because I want to check it out. And I'm like, I'll just cancel it after the free trial period. And I, of course, never do because I never remember. So I think having all of your subscriptions in one central place that you can easily cancel or change the amount on or whatever, I think is like super powerful.
Yeah, you can never forget about it, because as long as you remember all your wallets, right? You can see what they're subscribed to across every blockchain.
Yeah, so let's get into the security bit. Security has been top of mind for me recently just because I've been hearing about so many new types of scams. Like, I feel like the scammers are getting more and more creative and getting people that aren't, new to the space. It's not just the Discord bots that are getting newbies in the space now. It's like people I know who've been in the space since 2013 are getting fooled by some of these scams. So I'm wondering, and obviously, like, I'm non-technical, so, and for our listeners who are non-technical, maybe at a high level, without getting too deep into the weeds, how does Loop ensure security, especially when you're interacting with, one wallet could be interacting with multiple different businesses for recurring payments? Like, does that increase users' risk of, scammers or fraud or losing their money, or how do you ensure security?
Yeah, so the first thing we do is really take advantage of the ERC20 allowance function. So what that basically says is when you sign this transaction, you tell a contract the maximum amount of a given token it can spend. And so even if someone takes over the contract, like full control of what's happening, they can only spend whatever your allowance is set to. The problem is a lot of these dApps give unlimited allowance, and that's how someone's able to drain your wallet. In our case, for example, I mean, a lot of subscriptions are yearly subscriptions, right? So off the bat, we just set the allowance to 1 year, which should give you some comfort that attacker could never take more than that 1 year allowance. I mean, the other thing, which is sort of low hanging fruit, is make it really easy to decrease the allowance, increase the allowance, cancel a subscription, so that if something malicious happens, people can take action. I think the other sort of bucket is a lot of the attacks we've seen recently tend to be social engineering or phishing. In our case, we're a B2B2C play. So we're working with businesses who use us as a checkout flow. And so as long as you trust the end business's website, you shouldn't be interacting with a malicious contract. So for example, if you want to buy like Block Native services, they have a pay with crypto checkout button, and that button interacts with our contract. So if you've navigated to the right site, it should be pretty difficult to, be phished, because you should trust the websites that you personally navigate to versus like clicking a link.
Right, right. That makes sense. And does Loop work for both custodial and non-custodial wallets?
No, we work with non-custodial wallets. The hiccup with custodial wallets is you would need a way to identify like who the transaction is related to. Because you own your own wallet, if you sign a transaction, I know it's for you. If everyone's transactions are commingled within one, sort of custodial wallet, then there would need to be a second piece that differentiates like who that payment is attributed to.
Got it. Got it. Do you see this being mostly like crypto native people who are using Loop, at least in the beginning, until the masses catch up to where Web3 is?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I do see the first adopters as people who live in crypto. If you make money in crypto, you're a DeFi trader. I mean, the last thing you want to do is take your crypto, turn it to dollars, and then pay a credit card bill, right? In the future, though, the most pervasive business model is SaaS. And so if Netflix wants to offer crypto payment rails, I mean, they need a way to automate those payments. And I think that's where Loop comes in. But that's probably, 5 years, 10 years from now.
Right. I was going to ask, looking ahead to the future, where do you see, I guess, like what timeline do you see all of this sort of like taking shape? And we talked about these nonprofits starting to accept
Yeah.
crypto, like SaaS companies like Netflix starting to accept crypto. Like, when do you think that will all happen and become more pervasive?
Yeah, maybe it's closer to 5 years. I think the different pieces of the puzzle are actually mostly built, but they're not connected. So connecting the on ramp to an easy on chain like non custodial wallet, and then connecting that to the smart contract. That streamlined flow is being built, and that's where what we aim to be a part of, but it's not quite there yet. And I also maybe personally think most people probably won't care if they're using crypto or not on the back end, but they're going to have a better experience and open to different use cases that didn't exist before that would lead them down that path.
Yeah. Looking ahead too, because I know your expertise in this space goes far beyond just auto pay or subscription businesses. What are you most excited to see happen in Web3 in the next, let's say, like 3 to 5 years?
Oh, uh, one of our investors recently pushed me down the music rabbit hole. And so I do really like this idea of royalties being on chain. They're not being sort of middlemen between what artists create and that content being enjoyed and funds going back to them. Uh, I might have bought one or two music NFTs, in support of this, but I think a lot more, we call them like data efficiency, use cases for blockchain that really impact people in the real world. Maybe something else that's related that's been like a passion idea of mine is tickets. Like it is crazy to me that you buy a concert ticket, it's a PDF, and then you have to go on StubHub to like prove that this is the real PDF to sell to someone else. Right? Like an NFT solves that so easily. It's just a question of who are the power players that issue these NFTs and like create systems for people to buy and interact. But I think that's coming soon.
I think building some sort of real life utility into NFTs is actually a really good way to sort of like introduce NFTs and crypto to the mainstream, because it's very easy. It's not it's like hardly even skeuomorphic. I mean, it's really like just real physical world stuff that doesn't isn't very hard to wrap your mind around. Like, you could explain what you just said to anybody off the streets and I think they would like understand, more or less like the idea of having an on chain or having a digital like ticket that you can prove that you're the true owner and you can't just go like sell fraudulent tickets to people.
Yeah, and it's a real pain we've all felt. You can empathize with it a lot more than sort of talking about DeFi, investing trading strategies where you have to like explain arbitrage to someone.
Yeah, which I still don't fully understand what that means. So,
You see, it's not that great.
with music NFTs, where do you think music services like Spotify are headed in 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm an institutionalist. Like, I don't think big companies are going away, but what I think crypto does is introduces true competition in a way that they didn't feel before. And so a Spotify, I could see it having to adapt to survive, having to acquire a crypto company to get that sort of knowledge and intelligence. Maybe they have to own a bunch of NFTs or you know governance tokens to be a part of an ecosystem that they want to join. So I see them as eventually becoming players in the space.
Yeah. What do you think about recurring payments for creators? Maybe musicians isn't the best example because most musicians aren't putting out new music constantly. Like they'll work on an album, put it out, maybe like spend another year working on an album, put another album out. But maybe more for writers or more for artists. What do you think about recurring payments for them to say like, hey, you can subscribe to my newsletter, for instance,
Yeah.
with like a monthly payment of X amount, and I'll give you regular content.
Yeah, I mean, I think Substack and Mirror really prove the use case that there are certain voices that people want to hear from and are willing to pay directly to those voices to get not only access to their premium content, but access to them because artists and creators are so much closer to their audience than they were before. And being able to accept crypto in some ways is so much easier than accepting, US dollars because you don't have to set up a bank account. Anyone can download and open a MetaMask wallet, put up a button that says pay with crypto, and it's like 30 minutes later, you're monetizing.
Yeah, personally, I would love to see that model flipped too, where right now you would pay somebody X amount a month to read their Substack, like get weekly newsletters, Substacks delivered to your inbox. But with Mirror, for instance, I could envision a scenario where, for instance, like I love Eleni's writings, like she puts out great content. I want to just pay her every time she writes anything. Like I don't even need to read it, but anytime she publishes anything on Mirror, I'm going to collect an edition of that. That could be a cool like use case for Loop too.
Definitely, because it's programmable. I think the hiccup there is you really need micropayments, right? I don't know if this is possible today on Ethereum, but on something like Polygon, Solana, any of the other L2s, like that is definitely, I think, part of the future.
Yeah, definitely. One other thing I was going to ask too is how does gas work with the recurring payment? So does gas come out of the customer's wallet or is that built into Loop? I'm just thinking because if I set a recurring payment and, in a month if gas goes like out the roof, normally I might want to be like, well, I don't like need to do this thing right now. Maybe I can just wait to do it when gas is lower.
Yeah.
How does gas work?
So end users only pay gas when they subscribe and they cancel. All the recurring payments in between are actually paid by a third party. So at a high level, the way the system works, it's very similar to a keeper network. Bots will monitor the smart contracts, wait for someone's auto payment to come due. When they call the function, then they're the ones that pay gas. But the benefit is you can batch transactions. So instead of you paying gas by yourself, you end up, this person who calls the function can batch you with 20 other people who are also, subscribed and due in that moment. And the gas cost is split across them. What they get in return is something akin to a processing fee. So we charge a really small amount. We actually charge it to the end company, not to the user, that compensates the third party from doing this work. So it's
Very cool.
really similar to being like a credit card network, Visa payment processor, but in crypto. And in the future, something we're looking to do, that I don't want to tie something too soon, is decentralize that function of running these bots. So a good example is like MakerDAO CDPs, right? Third parties monitor the MakerDAO contracts. They take actions because they're financially rewarded. And now that work is decentralized. And so we're playing with an iteration of that as well.
Very cool. Very cool. I can't wait to see that. I'm super stoked. What are you projecting timeline wise for all of that?
That's probably a year away. I mean, it's the most important, I think, part of our system. And we also want to institute ideas of like reputation because a company should really care about who's doing their payment processing. And so we want to make sure the people who are calling that function are, good stewards of the network.
Yeah. One more question for you, Eleni. I've been asking everybody this, so I feel like it's only fair that I ask you as well. But if Web3 were to completely cease to exist in 5 years, why would that be?
Oh, why would it be? I think, okay, I think if there wasn't more innovation, like if we stop building new tools and stop coming up with solutions to problems, that the system would break, because we've made great progress, but we're not at an end state by any means. And I could see things like regulations, or even like, quite frankly, people becoming extremely wealthy and becomes like a disincentive to keep innovating because you've cashed out, sort of halt the industry.
That's a good answer. Most people go for I feel like the cop out answer is like regulation
Oh,
is
but
what most people go for.
maybe it's because I'm from government, but also, I mean, the world is big. Which country's regulation, right? Like,
Yeah.
US regulates something, someone in Europe could solve it. If Europe regulates it, like maybe you go to Australia or Southeast Asia. Like, that's a whack-a-mole game.
Yeah. Well, for you having worked in the federal government before, what's your take on US regulation? Do you think regulators are going to figure this out? And like what timeline are we looking at? Because I think this is such like a touchy topic now with like Andre Cronje's recent article, but I think that we're not going to reach mainstream adoption of crypto until we have regulation, just because there's enough risk averse people in this world who won't really want to try new things that aren't regulated, I think. But yeah, what do you think?
I have two answers. One, I think in crypto, sometimes VCs, or a lot of times VCs, get bad raps, but I actually think they're a huge piece to this regulatory puzzle, because they are people who have access and have like the ears of decision makers. And when they're financially invested in this space, I see it as like less likely the space dies, because people with power care. And so those are sometimes people you want to be your friends. I think the other important thing that they do, which is like the sort of problem I see with regulation, is a lot of the people who are making these decisions are not technologists. Like, they've never, for the most part, they've worked in policy their whole lives. Maybe they're lawyers. They're not people who worked at tech companies or startups. And again, I think VCs sort of do a good job of like bridging that gap and putting the right people who are building and are, more intimately familiar with the problems in front of those who make decisions. But we'd be better off, I think, if the people making decisions came from a more diverse background.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. That's a really interesting take. I'm glad I asked you about that. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with our listeners that we didn't get a chance to talk about yet?
Well, did you plug your new DAO? We talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, crowdfund launched. I mean, we're recording this on April 19th. Crowdfund just launched today.
What are you
So
most excited about?
I'm most excited to just like see this community of people that are created from this and like see what we can accomplish. I'm super excited. I think my strategy with this was really putting out like a strong set of values and seeing if that will attract the like right kind of people, like the people who are value aligned. And I'm of the belief that if you can get a value aligned group of people together, you can really build anything. And so the community part of it is in my opinion, like even more important than the product itself, because if you have the right community, you can build any product. So right now, like it's just this podcast, but we have these much broader values and visions of providing Web3 education to people, and that can take so many different shapes and forms. And so I'm just excited to see what the community comes up with.
I think I told you this offline, but I think it's a genius idea and I'm really excited. And it reminds me a lot that VCs like to say they invest in teams and people, not ideas. And, this sounds very similar. You're creating a community. It's less about the idea and more about the people who are building it.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, before you go, Eleni, tell people where they can find you if they want to connect with you personally, and also where they can go to learn more about Loop.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. It's at Eleni Thinks. And Loop has a Twitter, which is loopcrypto_XYZ. We have a website, which is loopcrypto.xyz. Admittedly, it's pretty sparse, but in the coming months, we'll have more.
You have a newsletter sign up too on your website, right? So people can stay in the loop about Loop.
Yes, exactly. We love that pun. Exactly.
I'm sure I'm not the first. I know I was thinking about it and I was like, I'm sure I'm not the first one to say this, but couldn't resist. Thank you so much, Eleni, for taking the time to come on. I'm really excited to see where Loop is headed, and I can't wait for Loop to publicly launch so I can test it out myself. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll be back again soon with another episode of the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Rehash. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to get involved in helping shape next season of the podcast, including nominating and voting on your favorite guests, go to rehash.mirror.xyz to join our crowdfund. And don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe to help us get this podcast heard by as many people as possible. Thanks for being part of this community, and I can't wait to connect with many of you in Discord and Twitter soon.